And I just want to say a very heartfelt welcome to all those of you that were able to come. Let me begin just by recognizing a few people that are here with us today. We have some friends from the Social Housing Services Corporation. Welcome. We have Mitzi Hunter here from the Toronto Community Housing Corporation. Where did Mitzi go? There she is, and I think some of your colleagues are here, Mitzi, as well. And I want to acknowledge Brad Butt, who is here from the GTAA and has been a really helpful contributor as well to our work as we have moved along. And I think I saw Graham Stewart, who has also been a very helpful colleague to us as we've done this work. I also want to just take a moment to acknowledge some of my own colleagues. Susan McDonnell, who is our Senior Director of Research and Public Policy. She's just gone and retired on us, which is a huge source of disappointment to me. But this was an enormous undertaking, and Susan and her team, who are also represented here today, have made a great contribution to this work, and so I want to thank all of them for their incredible work. Finally, I'd like to say a very heartfelt thank you to our financial supporters, Toronto Public Health, Ontario's Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and Will and Judy Matthews. All have contributed to this research. We could not have done the work that we did, the exhaustive process of interviewing literally thousands of Torontonians to hear directly from them about life in the communities. And we could not have done all of that work without the generous support of our funders, so we thank them. In 2003, United Way began a transformation. We wanted to multiply the impact we have on the communities that we serve, to begin by addressing the root causes and challenges facing our city, not just treat the symptoms. A significant element of this ongoing evolution is a focus on research. To help us better understand our city and the trends that have an impact on the quality of people's lives. Our research ensures that United Way's strategies for building a better city are evidence-based and rooted in the facts. In 2004, we released the report Poverty by Postal Code. It painted a troubling picture of poverty in our city because it showed that poverty had become increasingly concentrated in specific neighborhoods in the city, and that it was most severe in the inner suburban communities around the former city of Toronto. 6 years ago, Poverty by Postal Code showed us we have areas that are in serious risk of falling behind. Today, United Way is releasing the next chapter of that study titled Poverty by Postal Code 2, Vertical Poverty. This report picks up where the first Poverty by Postal Code left off, by analyzing StatsCan data from the long-form census to give us a clearer idea of what poverty actually looks like in our city. We found the trend of poverty being geographically concentrated in specific areas continues, and that the number of neighborhoods where there is significant poverty has grown substantially. And I just want to draw your attention to this slide. So 1981, the varying shades from yellow, orange to red reflect the concentration of poverty. 25 years later, what we don't want is for that to be colored in. What you can see is that increasingly we are filling up the neighborhoods with not only yellow, but the orange and disappointingly the red colors. That represents shocking growth citywide. But a closer look at those areas hardest hit reveals the former city of Toronto is actually faring better than many of the former suburbs, where the concentration of poverty is intensifying. More and more low and modest income families are making their home in the inner suburbs, where we've seen an explosion in the number of high poverty neighborhoods. In 1981, there were no high poverty neighborhoods in East York. Today, there's 10. In Scarborough, the number of high poverty neighborhoods has gone from 4 to 40. And actually, you can look at any one of these areas and you can see there's that same disappointing and alarming growth in the number of neighborhoods living in concentrated poverty. This growth in the number of families living in poverty is only one dimension of the story. Our findings also reveal that within these neighborhoods, poverty is becoming further concentrated in private high-rise rental buildings. So that over time, the nature of poverty in our city has become not only geographic, but vertical as well. A much higher percentage of families who live in high-rise buildings today are poor compared to 25 years ago. There was a 14-point jump between 1981 and 2006, meaning the number of families living in poverty in Toronto's high-rise buildings grew by 56% in 25 years. These families are being squeezed by both ends. The cost of rent is increasing, and the average income has dropped. And you can see here what we're showing you up at the top. Up here is the increase in rents. Down here is the decline in income. That tells us a very important story about what happens to people's capacity to actually pay the rent every month. In East York today, an average family is paying more than $3,500 for rent than they were 25 years ago. So a hypothetical family in East York paying thousands more for rent has experienced a decline in income of almost $11,000. Throughout the inner suburbs, income has fallen nearly $9,000 on average. People are struggling to get by. They're struggling to do more with less. In addition to analyzing StatsCan data, our study also involved a massive undertaking, the first of its kind in Canada. Nearly 3,000 direct interviews with people who are living in high-rise towers. Now, most of the people we interview lived in privately owned high-rise buildings, though we do have a small sampling that also came out of nonprofit housing. While we heard many encouraging stories, some of what they told us was cause for great concern. The wide gap between the rising cost of rent and falling income is forcing many families to make difficult choices. Almost a quarter of respondents said they have to choose between paying the rent and buying other necessities every single month. More than 30% said they have to make this decision several times throughout the year. Vertical Poverty explored the connection between poverty and housing conditions in the high-rise towers of our inner suburbs. We found that in these high-poverty neighborhoods, residents experience social disorder, drug dealing, vandalism, rowdiness, at a significantly higher rate than other Canadian communities. Again, I just want to draw your attention to this red color is from our study of high-rise tenants living in high concentrations of poverty. This yellow color is other Canadian communities. And you can see that the experience in these neighborhoods is much higher. We also found conditions in these towers are consistently worse than in neighborhoods where there is less severe concentration of poverty. In high poverty neighborhoods, every indicator of housing conditions, from pests and vermin to the number of repairs needed in a unit, is worse than in areas of low poverty. Indicators like problems with entry lock to an apartment are only 6% higher in high poverty neighborhoods. But the more serious issues like infestation, trespassing, drug dealing are remarkably worse. And you can see that here. We've actually put right across the bottom, and you probably can't see it at the back. So I'll tell you, pests and vermin, elevator breakdown, unit repairs, drugs as a problem, vandalism as a problem, entry lock repairs, trespassers. In every single measure, you can see that these red-colored high poverty cluster neighborhoods are having a greater experience than the others. These measures of housing conditions are important, not only to the building affected, but also to the neighboring community and the city around it, because poor housing conditions can destabilize an entire neighborhood. Poor housing conditions weaken people's sense of connection to their neighbors, and it encourages them to move away. In high poverty areas, more than half of residents say if they moved, they would relocate to another neighborhood, compared to 36% who said they would stay in the same neighborhood but perhaps move to a different building. And as social disorder and other problems rise, more and more people are likely to move away. When as many as 7 incidents are reported, more than 60% of residents say they want to leave the area. Now, it may seem obvious that people living in a high poverty neighborhood might want to relocate, but this effect of neighborhood flight can cause a serious erosion in a local community, leading to disinvestment in the neighborhood and driving away local business. So, that's the bad news. But we also have some good news. Some of these findings point to serious challenges that our city must overcome, but there was also some very good learnings from this report. News that gives us great hope for reversing the trends. It confirms what we knew intuitively, that high-rise housing stock is an essential asset to our city. Outside of New York City, Toronto has the highest number of high-rise rental buildings in all of North America. These towers are at the heart of so many communities in our city, where 500,000 people live and are raising their families. For the most part, they're safe, and they're relatively affordable compared to other housing. Without this housing stock, thousands of people in our city would be much worse off. And even though they may face challenges, more than 3/4 of the people we talk to in these high-rise towers say their neighborhoods are actually a very good place to live. They say good things about their landlords. They say the landlords are doing their very best to keep up with maintenance and repairs. 84% are satisfied with the repairs their landlord has made in their unit. And we know that most of the landlords are very good landlords. Perhaps most promising is the strong connection that exists between people who live in the high-rise towers and the community that comes together to support one another. About half of all residents say they have neighbors who they can rely on to watch their apartment, take care of their kids, lend them money. At United Way, we know these kinds of connections among residents are the very foundation upon which neighborhood revitalization is built. And so we're encouraged to find that these foundations are strong. There are many serious challenges facing our city. Geographically concentrated poverty has continued and is still most severe in the inner suburbs. An increasing number of low-income families in the inner suburbs are living in high-rise rental buildings. These families are hard hit by rising rent and declining income. Many regularly go without essentials in order to make ends meet. The buildings they call home are deteriorating, which threatens to undermine communities and destabilize neighborhoods. These trends threaten the long-term health and prosperity of Toronto. When families can't lift themselves out of poverty and neighborhoods fall behind, our entire city's well-being is at risk. Vertical poverty draws attention to factors that are putting pressure on our city's neighborhoods, but despite its problems, the housing stock of Toronto's high-rise rental buildings is a vital asset for thousands and thousands of low and moderate income families. That's why United Way has prepared a series of recommendations based on the findings of this report. These are listed in detail in the executive summary and in the full report, but I'd like to take a few minutes now just to present them to you at a very high level. Many individuals and organizations have been part of shaping these recommendations for how we move forward, such as the Social Housing Services Corporation, and I'd like to thank everybody who contributed to this report. So our first overall recommendation is that a coordinated, determined effort must be made to restore mixed income neighborhoods in our city in an attempt to reverse this trend of poverty becoming concentrated in specific communities. Each level of government has a role to play. The federal government's leadership is needed in establishing a national housing strategy, and along with the provincial government provide funding for new nonprofit housing. The provincial government can also play a key role in establishing an Ontario housing benefit to address the growing gap between rising rent and falling income. The City of Toronto has a role to play by working with partners in the private and nonprofit sectors to foster economic development in areas where poverty has become concentrated. Our second recommendation is that we must sustain high-rise stock in good repair for today and for the future. High-rise rental buildings are housing more and more of Toronto's low and modest income families. These towers are a critical asset for our city and for the families who call them home. Again, all governments have a role to play in this. In the next phase of its poverty reduction strategy, the Government of Ontario should further develop a place-based response to the continued growth of poverty, to address the unique conditions that contribute to poverty in different communities. The province should also partner with the federal government to invest in upgrading nonprofit housing. Housing is a vital public asset, and it should be considered a key investment for long-term infrastructure funding. Both nonprofit housing and private landlords as well must be given the supports they need to properly maintain their buildings. A variety of coordinated strategies are necessary to protect the quality and safety of Toronto's high-rise towers, to revitalize the social and physical conditions of these buildings and the communities around them, because the condition of these towers is fundamental to many of the trends we have identified in the inner suburbs: growing poverty, increasing density, rising social disorder. And going forward, these buildings will either contribute to growing problems or become part of the solution. Our final group of recommendations is a call for all of us to come together. This report tells us we have a real opportunity to strengthen community life in high-rise towers, and that we can make great progress by working to build community through partnerships. Behind the broad issues and the trends identified in this report are the real people who live in Toronto's high-rise towers. They must be given tools and resources to engage with one another, to tackle shared problems, and to change their communities for the better. This means actively engaging and supporting people who live in high-rise towers, providing spaces where they can come together, and building local capacity among neighbours to create positive change in their community. This approach of building broad partnerships to address local issues is one that United Way has taken with our Building Strong Neighbourhood strategy. This kind of cooperation is fundamental to creating the conditions necessary for building resilient and thriving communities. In addition to our recommendations for engaging residents, we recognize that another important tool for fostering connections is community space and amenities. Investment and other supports must be given to help revitalize common spaces and facilities in these towers, places to meet the social, cultural, and recreational needs of our communities. The best news in this report is that a strong foundation exists. The support of connections among tenants in Toronto's high-rise towers, the desire of landlords to maintain their buildings, the willingness of all levels of government to tackle problems at a community level. These are all encouraging indicators that we can take meaningful action and help to make these communities everything they can be. There's also a strong desire for change among everyone involved, and together we believe we can make a real difference. I'm now very happy to take any questions that you may have.